It is the 10th anniversary of my marriage to my husband, John.
They were once the couple everyone envied. Late-night glasses of red wine, spontaneous trips to Italy, a love so natural, so effortless, it seemed untouchable. But then something shifted, something dark, something no one saw coming. Rachael Ray, the unstoppable force of daytime TV, the woman who could brighten a room simply by walking into it, suddenly stopped appearing at major events. Her radiant energy, once impossible to contain, dimmed without warning. And what terrified fans the most wasn't her absence. It was John Cusimano, the man who never left her side for nearly 20 years, suddenly showing up alone, pale, withdrawn, shaken in a way no camera could hide. Rumors exploded overnight, not about career troubles, not about scandals, but about them, about what John may have discovered, and why he might be quietly preparing to say goodbye to the woman he once promised he could never live without. Everything began on one quiet evening at their lake house. No cameras, no producers, just two people who had weathered fame hand in hand. John stood across the kitchen island watching the woman he adored try to lift a simple pot, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She tried to smile, but it wasn't the familiar, glowing smile America loved. It was the smile of someone hiding a storm. And in that moment, something inside John simply broke. He walked out of the kitchen mid-dinner prep and didn't return for hours. What could possibly make a man like John, loyal, patient, fiercely protective, begin to pull away? The truth is far more heartbreaking than anyone expected, and it all starts with a smile that was slowly disappearing, while millions never noticed. To the outside world, Rachael Ray still seemed unshakable. On television, she laughed easily, tossed pasta with her signature confidence, and spoke with the warm, raspy charm that had made her a household name. Millions saw the same vibrant woman they had loved for years. But behind the scenes, everything was changing. Those closest to her noticed the truth first. Her once boundless energy was slipping away. Tasks that had been effortless for decades now left her exhausted. Her powerful voice, the one that used to fill the studios, would fade unexpectedly mid-sentence. And the tremors in her hands, subtle at first, began appearing more frequently. Rachael tried to hide it. She always had. She pushed through filming schedules, smiled through interviews, and acted as though nothing was wrong. That was who she was. The woman who kept going for everyone else, even when she was falling apart inside. But John saw everything. He saw the nights when she collapsed onto the couch long before dinner. He saw the mornings when she slept far later than she ever had. He saw the light behind her eyes dimming, no matter how hard she tried to fake it for the cameras. And the most painful part of it all was that she refused to talk about it. For John, helplessness slowly became obsession. While she slept, he sat alone in the glow of his laptop, looking up symptoms, reading medical journals, desperately trying to understand what was happening to his wife. He begged her to see a doctor, pleaded with her to slow down, but Rachael kept insisting she was fine. Then came the day everything changed. The diagnosis, the one never revealed publicly, hit them harder than any tabloid headline ever could. Friends say John looked like the air had been knocked out of him. Rachael tried to be as strong, but even she couldn't stop the tears. And from that moment on, John began to let go. Not because he didn't love her, but because he loved her too deeply. And watching her fade became a pain too heavy to hide. The unraveling of their marriage didn't start with anger or betrayal, It started in that doctor's office with a truth they weren't ready for and a future neither knew how to face. At the height of her fame, Rachael Ray's life was a relentless cycle of filming, traveling, promoting, and building an empire that seemed too big for one person to carry. But when the studio lights shut off, something in her shifted. Her laugh didn't rise as quickly. Her energy, once a constant, unstoppable force, felt strained, almost forced, and her silences, once rare, grew longer and heavier. John noticed the change before anyone else. He didn't press her with questions. Instead, he watched quietly, as though afraid that speaking the truth out loud might make everything worse. He saw her forget simple words mid-sentence. He saw her struggle to finish meals she once devoured with joy. He watched her sit motionless for long stretches, staring into a distance she couldn't explain. Whenever he asked if something was wrong, she brushed it off with a small laugh and a "just tired." But John knew the difference between exhaustion and a storm brewing beneath the surface. And the distance between them began to widen, not out of anger, but out of fear. John started taking long walks alone after dinner, wandering the quiet roads near their home until late into the night. He slept in more, spoke less, his once bright presence dimmed beside hers, two fading lights reflecting each other's pain. Meanwhile, Rachael refused to let the world see her unraveling. She kept working, kept filming, kept smiling, even though every day took more effort than the one before. But deep down, she knew she was losing her spark, the same spark that had once lit up kitchens across America. John wasn't pulling away because he didn't care. He was preparing himself, bracing for something he couldn't name but could feel approaching, like a slow, quiet disaster. And to truly understand the weight of that moment, we must go back. Back before the television lights, back before the fame, back before the quiet, heartbreaking unraveling, long before the studios, the talk shows, and the sprawling product lines. Rachael Ray was just a hard-working girl from Glens Falls, New York, a place filled with sizzling pans, Sicilian flavors, and a family that believed food could heal anything. Her childhood home was always alive with the aromas of garlic, basil, and simmering tomato sauce. The kitchen wasn't just a room, it was her universe. The dinner table wasn't just a place to eat, it was where life happened. Her mother, Elsa, ran restaurants while raising 3 kids, and young Rachael absorbed every ounce of the chaos and creativity. She learned early that food was more than nourishment. It was connection, comfort, and a way to bring people back from whatever storms they were facing. When the family later moved to Lake George, Rachel's world grew even bigger. They ran local restaurants, and she was in the middle of it all, taking orders, prepping ingredients, juggling the madness behind the counter. She wasn't a dreamy teenager fantasizing about TV fame. She was grinding through 12-hour days, learning to run a kitchen with grit, charm, and both hands tied. Even as a kid, her spark was unmistakable, raw, relentless, impossible to ignore. After high school, she jumped straight into the intensity of New York City. She worked everywhere: candy counters at Macy's, high-end specialty food markets, trendy grocery stores. Every job gave her new skills, new flavors, new stories. But city life wore her down. The pace, the pressure, the noise, it wasn't the kind of fulfillment she craved. Rachael wanted something real again, something with heart. So she went back home, and there, tucked inside a resort in the Adirondacks, she began teaching simple cooking classes for locals. Real meals, real people, No fancy presentation, just food you could trust. Her motto was simple: 30 minutes or less. No excuses. She had no idea that this small idea, this humble classroom setup, was about to explode into a national phenomenon. But it did. And once it happened, her name would be etched into American cooking history forever. Her small local cooking classes were just the beginning. The real turning point came when a producer noticed her effortless charm on camera, her natural warmth, her realness, the way she made cooking feel simple instead of intimidating. Soon, Rachael was on local television, delivering quick, approachable meals with the same energy she brought to her classes. Audiences adored her. She wasn't a chef in a pristine white coat. She was the friend who showed you how to get dinner done without a stress, without judgment, and without hours in the kitchen. The buzz spread fast. In 2001, the Food Network launched 30-minute meals, and it exploded almost instantly. Rachel's style was refreshingly different. No fancy techniques, no complicated ingredients, just practical, heartfelt cooking that felt like a warm hug. The success of the show opened every possible door: cookbooks that flew off the shelves, product lines that filled grocery aisles, and eventually her own daytime talk show, a mix of cooking, celebrity interviews, human stories, lifestyle advice, and unmistakable Rachael Ray sparkle. She even launched a magazine, a massively successful pet food brand. And during the pandemic, when the world felt upside down, she filmed from her own kitchen, inviting millions into her home and offering comfort through real-time cooking and conversation. At one point, she was simply everywhere: on TV, in bookstores, in supermarkets, on talk shows, on newsstands. Her name didn't just represent a person, it became a brand, a cultural presence, a symbol of comfort in chaotic times. But the brighter her star became, the more demanding her schedule grew. The hours stretched longer, the pressure deepened, and the boundary between her public persona and private life began to blur. She was smiled through exhaustion, laughed through stress. And when she thought no one was watching, she leaned on John, the one person who had been holding her steady through it all. Her empire was undeniable. Her success was legendary. But the toll behind the scenes was becoming harder to hide. And behind every milestone, every dish, every interview was John, supporting her, adjusting to her spotlight, and slowly, quietly disappearing into the background. John Cusimano never set out to be famous. Long before he entered the whirlwind of Rachael Ray's world, he had already built a life defined by two passions: law and music. A trained attorney and the frontman of the rock band The Cringe, John lived in two worlds, writing contracts by day and performing on a stage by night. He wasn't chasing spotlight. He wasn't chasing attention. He simply loved what he did. But everything changed in 2005 when they married in a stunning Tuscan castle. Their lives intertwined completely. And with Rachel's fame skyrocketing, John found himself pulled into a world he never asked for. The relentless glare of cameras, interviews, tabloids, and public expectation. Still, he adapted. John became more than just a husband. He became a silent anchor, a man who mixed cocktails on her show, joked with celebrity guests, and appeared in small, intimate moments that fans adored. But behind the cheerful on-camera persona was a man whose sacrifices went unnoticed. He gave up touring, turned down major legal cases, stepped back from his own dreams, not because he was weak, but because he wanted to be close to Rachael, to keep their worlds connected even when fame tried to tear them apart. Friends say he was never resentful, but they could see the exhaustion settling into him. Being the steady presence behind a global superstar was admirable, but it was also lonely. It required patience, humility, and a willingness to disappear so someone else could shine. And over time, John began to fade, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. He spent more evenings alone, drank a little more than he should, spoke less, laughed less, and lost pieces of himself that no one except Rachel noticed. Because while Rachel's star rose higher than ever, John was silently carrying a weight no one understood, a weight that would soon become unbearable when their marriage faced its first true public crisis. By 2013, the perfect image of Rachael Ray and John Cusimano's marriage began to crack, not privately, but under the harsh, unforgiving spotlight of public scrutiny. Tabloids erupted with explosive allegations, claims that John had been unfaithful, that he had secretly met a woman in Florida, even accusations that he had paid for her company. Whispers of late-night drinking, reckless behavior, and wild partying spread like wildfire. For the first time, the man who had always been Rachel's calm, steady presence was suddenly painted as a stranger, someone she couldn't trust. Headlines screamed betrayal. Fans were shocked. But Rachael Ray didn't waver. She stood by her husband with a firmness that silenced entire rooms. "I know where my husband is every night," she told reporters, her voice steady, unshaken. John himself denied everything. Gradually, the storm began to settle, but something inside their marriage had changed, quietly, deeply, and permanently. Their smiles in interviews became thinner. Their chemistry, once effortless, now felt rehearsed. The ease they once shared was slipping away, replaced by a subtle tension they couldn't hide. Then came the tragedies, blows far more painful than tabloid headlines. In a story rarely discussed, Rachel was once attacked outside her apartment in Queens, dragged into an alley, held at gunpoint, and left traumatized, shaking, and forever changed. The experience shattered her sense of safety and forced her to leave the city she once loved. The wound remained open for years. Then, in 2013, heartbreak struck again. Her beloved Aunt Geraldine, who was house-sitting for her, got locked out in freezing weather with no spare key. Trying desperately to get inside, she was found lifeless the next morning. The grief was unbearable. Some relatives blamed Rachel, others blamed her demanding schedule. The guilt pressed down on her like a weight she couldn't escape. She kept working, kept smiling, kept pretending, but something in her hardened, and something in John began to fade even more, an unspoken distance growing in the quiet moments between them. Together they endured scandal, violence, and devastating loss. But even after surviving so much, another shadow loomed ahead, one that would test their marriage in a way nothing ever had. Rachael Ray's voice wasn't just part of her identity, it was her identity. Warm, slightly raspy, full of energy and character, it became the sound that millions associated with comfort, home, and joy. But very few people knew how fragile that voice truly was. Since childhood, Rachel had struggled with recurring throat issues. They were manageable at first, an irritation here, a strain there, but they never fully disappeared. And as she built a career that required her to speak non-stop, those issues quietly intensified. Then in 2008, everything boiled over. Tabloids exploded with terrifying headlines, claims that she had throat cancer, that she would undergo radiation. that she was preparing to step away from television entirely. Fans panicked, the media spiraled, and speculation grew darker by the hour. The truth, as it turned out, was far less dramatic, but no less frightening for Rachael and John. Doctors discovered a benign cyst on her vocal cords. No cancer, no radiation, just a minor procedure. She took a week off, had the surgery, and returned to television with her signature smile assuring the world she was fine. But inside, something had changed forever. She became more cautious with her voice, speaking less off camera, conserving the strength she once took for granted. Every hoarse whisper became a reminder of how quickly everything she built could be taken away. And John, usually upbeat, witty, and full of life, grew unusually quiet. The scare had rattled him deeply. He understood what losing her voice could mean for her career, her identity, and their future. Even after the cyst was removed, their fear never fully faded. They pushed forward as they always did, but a lingering tension settled into their home. A quiet fear that another storm might be coming, and it did. Only this time, it wouldn't blow over with a week of rest or a simple surgery. This storm would come slowly, quietly, and take much more than just her voice. At first, it was easy to blame everything on exhaustion. Rachael Ray had spent more than 2 decades running at full speed, filming nonstop, juggling business ventures, building an empire brick by brick. Surely she just needed a break. But the signs didn't go away. They grew. The trembling in her hands, the fatigue that clung to her no matter how much she rested, the dimming tone of her once booming voice, even her laughter, the thing that had carried her through the hardest moments, became rare, thin, almost fragile. John saw every moment of it. He watched her push herself through days that once energized her. He watched her insist she was fine when she could barely make it through a simple conversation. He watched her body betray her spirit. Slowly, quietly, relentlessly. Rachael brushed it off, but John couldn't. Eventually, he convinced her to see doctors, not just one, but several. What followed were weeks of tests, scans, appointments, and long, suffocating silences while they waited for answers. And then the mood shifted. Whatever the doctor said, it was never made public. But those close to them described it as life-changing, a diagnosis that hit like a punch neither of them saw coming. From that moment, everything between them changed. John canceled gigs. He turned inward, withdrawing from the world he once embraced. He stopped performing with his band, stopped appearing on her show, stopped being the bright, steady presence he had always been. Their kitchen, once filled with laughter, music, and the clatter of shared cooking, fell painfully silent. Rachael continued to film, but it was clear something was missing on screen, a softness in her eyes that hinted at a battle she refused to share. Friends near their lake house often saw John walking alone late into the evenings. They described him as a man grieving someone who was still alive, someone he loved deeply but felt slipping away day by day. His smiles faded, his conversations shortened, and Rachael, she stopped making plans, stopped talking about the future, stopped looking ahead with the optimism she had always carried. Then came the quiet weekend. No shows, no social media updates, no appearances, just silence. Some insiders say John left her a letter that weekend. Not a dramatic goodbye, but a tender, heartbreaking message filled with memories, gratitude, and unmistakable sorrow, a letter written by someone preparing for the unthinkable. Rachael never confirmed it. but sources claimed she didn't speak for the rest of the night after reading it, whether it was a farewell or simply a moment of vulnerability between two people shattered by reality. One thing became painfully clear. Their story had entered its most fragile chapter. They were once the couple who defied the chaos of fame, who stood together through a scandal, violence, grief, and relentless pressure. But now John seemed to be letting go, not out of weakness and not out of abandonment, but out of heartbreak so deep he could no longer hide it. And as Rachel stepped back from the spotlight and John drifted quietly beside her, one question lingered in the air. Is this the end of their story or the beginning of something even more painful? As the world kept spinning, new shows, new celebrities, new stories, the saga of Rachael Ray and John Cusimano settled into a quiet, haunting space. No dramatic announcements, no public confessions, just two people navigating a deeply personal storm behind closed doors. Their friends described their home as peaceful but heavy, a house where love still lived, but where fear had slowly taken a seat at the table. Rachel moved more carefully, spoke more softly, and rested longer than ever before. Her flame didn't burn out, but it flickered. John stayed close, yet emotionally distant in a way that felt impossible to interpret. Some days he hovered like a guardian. Other days he wandered alone for hours, as though trying to prepare his heart for a goodbye he never wanted to face. And nobody knew whether he was stepping back or bracing himself to hold her up through whatever came next. Fans could feel it too. Her appearances grew fewer, her tone is softer, her once boundless energy replaced by a quiet vulnerability that frightened those who had followed her for decades. She was no longer the woman who lit up kitchens across America. She was simply Rachel, a human being fighting a battle she never asked for. And John, the man once known for his humor, his music, his mischief, now carried a grief that didn't belong to a marriage ending, but to a future suddenly uncertain. Those closest to them whispered about the slow goodbye, a phrase that carried both heartbreak and tenderness, the kind of love that doesn't vanish but fades quietly under the weight of reality. No one knows what comes next for them, not fans, not insiders, perhaps not even Rachel and John themselves. But one truth remains. Sometimes the deepest form of love is the one that stands silently beside you even when the words goodbye never leave the lips. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. And remember that behind every smile you see on screen is a human heart you may never fully understand.